She stood in the kitchen, her voice cold, eyes distant, and said, "You're becoming a burden, Mom." Just like that. After everything I gave up, after every sleepless night and every meal I skipped so she could eat, I became a burden. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just walked into my room, packed one small box, and left her the one thing she feared the most. Not out of spite, but out of truth. And if you stay with me, you'll understand why. It's strange how the smallest moments stay with you the longest. Not the birthdays or the big celebrations, but the quiet ones. The ones no one claps for. Like the night she had a fever and I sat beside her crib till the sun came up, whispering lullabies, gently wiping her forehead, praying, actually praying that I could take her pain instead. I remember watching her eyelashes flutter in sleep, whispering to myself, "You're mine. I'll protect you, always." No one saw that night. No one ever does. Motherhood is full of those moments, invisible ones. Silent sacrifices that become muscle memory. You forget what rest feels like. You stop buying things for yourself. You eat last. You sleep later. You cry quietly in the bathroom, then wipe your face and walk out smiling because your child shouldn't have to carry your exhaustion. I still remember the first time she asked for ice cream with that tiny voice, and I had just enough money in my wallet for either dinner or that cone. I bought the cone, I told her I wasn't hungry, and it wasn't even a lie. I was full just watching her smile. I don't say this for praise. That's the thing. Mothers don't expect parades. We don't need our children to thank us for every scraped knee we kissed or every lie we told, to make the world less cruel for them. But we do hope, quietly, secretly, that when we're old and tired, that love will still be there, that we'll still be seen. But something changes. There is a kind of loneliness that only exists when you're sitting in a room full of people and still feel invisible. That's what it became like, slowly, between me and my daughter. I could feel the shift long before she ever said anything cruel, long before she used that word, burden. But even before the word came, the silence had already started doing its quiet damage. At first, I thought I was imagining it. You tell yourself you're being too sensitive, that maybe it's just stress or the pressures of her job or the kids or a new house or something, anything but what it really is. I started noticing how her hugs grew shorter, polite, as if she were just checking a box. She'd say, "Hi, Mom," and already be reaching for her phone, her voice distracted, her fingers tapping. She'd forget things, small but meaningful ones. I once waited outside her house for 40 minutes because she thought I said next Saturday, not this one. I didn't even knock again. I just sat in the car, watching the porch light flicker in the wind, wondering when I had become so forgettable. But I made excuses for her. That's what mothers do. We rationalize pain. We dress up disrespect as busyness. We absorb every dismissive, sigh like a sponge, and keep smiling. But inside we bleed. It's not about needing anything big. I wasn't asking her for money or her time 24/7. I wasn't trying to move in or make demands. I just wanted to feel wanted, not tolerated, not managed like a task on her to-do list. One day we were at a family gathering. Her friends were there, colleagues, people I hadn't met before. I walked over to where she was standing with a few of them and reached for her arm, just to say hello, to stand beside her. And I swear to you, she flinched. Not a big gesture, but enough. Enough for me to feel it. Then she laughed lightly and said, "Oh, that's my mom. She's sweet, but can be a bit much. A bit much." That sentence sat in my chest like lead. I laughed too, because what else could I do? But in that moment, surrounded by people and noise and the smell of catered food, I never felt more alone in my life. After that, I started pulling back. I'd wait for her to call instead of calling first. I'd offer to visit less. I stopped, bringing small gifts when I came over, like I used to. Candles or food or little trinkets I thought she might like. It felt silly suddenly, offering bits of my heart to someone who kept looking at the clock whenever I spoke. It wasn't just what she did, it was how she made me feel while doing it. Like a task, like a leftover from a life she was trying to simplify. I remember once she was planning a trip. She needed someone to watch her kids for a weekend. I offered. Of course I did. That part of me still existed. The helper, the giver. But she paused. And then she said, "Actually, I think it'll be easier if we hire someone, you know. It's just routines and energy levels and stuff." She didn't say I was too old. She didn't need to. It was there, in the way her eyes softened like she was doing me a favor by rejecting me. So I smiled and said, "Of course, that makes sense." Then I went home and sat in my quiet kitchen for hours, staring at my hands. These same hands that once changed her diapers, made her lunches, brushed her hair before school. The same hands that once held her when she was afraid of thunder and whispered, "It's okay, baby. Mama's here." But I wasn't Mama anymore. I was just a body that needed managing. An extra seat at the table, a calendar entry, marked "Call Mom." And then one day it happened. She said it. We were arguing. Nothing big, just something about moving a chair in her house or how I folded the laundry wrong. Silly, forgettable things. But she snapped. Her voice was sharp, impatient, unfamiliar. She said, "God, sometimes you're just such a burden." Time didn't stop. It didn't need to. It shattered. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stared at her, and in that moment I saw not my daughter, but a woman I didn't recognize. Someone who had grown tired of me the way people grow tired of outdated furniture, still useful, but no longer loved. She tried to backtrack immediately, mumbling something about being stressed, but the word hung in the air like smoke. And once it's out, it's out. You can't unspeak a betrayal, you can't unfeel it. Later that night I sat in the guest room again, but this time I didn't cry. I made a decision. Because if being present meant being a burden, then maybe my absence would be a gift. She thought I needed her. But the truth was, I had needed to be seen. And now that I finally understood how she saw me, I could finally see myself clearly again too. And sometimes clarity hurts far less than hope. At first it's subtle. She stopped asking how I was. She started rushing off the phone. I told myself, she was busy. Life is fast now. Everyone's exhausted. That's what I told myself the first few times I felt that lump in my throat after she hung up. But the ache kept growing. I visited less. And when I did, I felt in the way. Her living room no longer had space for my presence. My tea wasn't the right brand. My stories were too long. My shoes were too loud on her floor. Everything about me began to feel excessive. Still, I held on to the small moments. I told myself it was just a phase. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she just needed time. After all, I used to be her whole world. She once cried if I left the room. She once wrapped her tiny arms around my neck and whispered, "Don't ever go away, Mama." But memory is a cruel thing when it's one-sided. One evening I was visiting her new home. She had just bought it, a lovely modern place with clean, white walls and furniture you weren't allowed to sit on without a coaster under your glass. I remember I had cooked her favorite dish and brought it over in a steel tiffin. I thought it might remind her of childhood, of warmth. She smiled politely and placed it in the fridge without opening it. "We're ordering Thai," she said. I nodded, told her that was fine. But something inside me broke just a little. Knew she'd forgotten I was coming. The food didn't matter, it was what it represented. A piece of my heart she left untouched in the back of a cold fridge. Later that night I overheard her on the phone in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I had gotten up for water, but her voice cut through the hallway like a blade. She's just exhausting. I feel like I'm parenting her now. That was the moment. Not when she forgot my birthday. Not when she stopped hugging me goodbye. But that sentence, that single careless sentence, burned through every memory I had clung to for comfort. I'm exhausting after everything. I stood there, glass in hand, water dripping down my wrist, and suddenly felt like I no longer belonged to anyone. Not even to the child I had built my life around. I wanted to walk in and confront her. I wanted to scream. But instead, I turned around, walked back to the guest room, and sat on the edge of the bed. The tears didn't come right away. First came the silence, a hollow silence that echoed louder than any fight could. But here's what she didn't know. Inside my bag was a photo, an old one. She was maybe 5, missing teeth, covered in chocolate, laughing while I held her on my lap. We were sitting in the doorway of our old home, sunlight falling on her curls. That house, that crumbling old place, was the one thing I had left that was mine and hers, and the only thing I'd never let go of. Until that night. Because something in me shifted. Sometimes you don't stop loving someone, you just finally understand they've stopped loving you back. And that truth, while painful, is also freeing. Because when you stop begging to be seen, you start seeing yourself again. She thought I needed her. She thought I was clinging to her out of fear, out of weakness. But I left that photo on her pristine kitchen counter the next morning, and I walked away, with the keys to the only thing she ever feared losing, the part of me that still needed her approval. She didn't call. She didn't ask where I went. But she would soon find out what I left behind, and what I took with me. And when she did, it wouldn't be silence she'd remember. It would be the sound of a door closing. Not in anger, in finality. Because sometimes, the softest goodbyes are the ones that echo forever. There's a particular kind of pain in watching someone rewrite the story of your love while you're still alive to remember every page. I kept trying. Even after the word burden came out of her mouth, I kept trying. That's what hurts the most. I didn't storm out. I didn't go silent. I gave her the benefit of the doubt like a mother always does. I told myself it was the heat of the moment, that maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But words have a way of staining the air, and once something is spoken, it echoes in everything after it. I remember deciding to be more helpful. I thought maybe I was in the way. Maybe if I offered more, did more, I could prove I was still valuable. I began showing up with bags of groceries. I folded laundry behind closed doors. I tried not to speak too long at dinner. I complimented her on things I didn't even like, just to keep the air light. Once she was having friends over and I offered to help set the table. She smiled tightly and said, "Actually, Mom, it's just easier if I do it myself." I nodded, stepped back, and watched through the kitchen doorway as she placed cutlery like it was a performance. I stood there, holding a tray of glasses. No one had asked for, and suddenly I felt like a stranger in my daughter's home. My own child. I started asking her permission to visit. Imagine that. The woman who once gave birth to her, who once stayed up through the night monitoring every breath, now had to ask, "Is it okay if I come next weekend? I won't stay long." She'd always say yes, but not like before. Her yes came with a sigh, with a glance at her calendar, with a hesitance that said, "Fine, but don't overstay." And then came the moment that truly broke me. It was her son's school play. I had been looking forward to it for weeks. I bought a new shawl. I baked his favorite cookies. I even practiced walking slower so I wouldn't slow them down. I wanted to be present, but never a problem. When I arrived at her house that day, she opened the door with a forced smile. Something was off. She looked me up and down and said, "Actually, Mom, about tonight, I think it might be better if you sit this one out. It's just going to be crowded and loud, and I just don't want you getting overwhelmed." Overwhelmed? I've raised 3 children in a 2-room house during a heat wave. I've walked miles in worn-out sandals to get medicine. I've sat through sleepless nights with sick children and a full-time job to return to the next morning. But suddenly I'm too fragile to watch a school play? I nodded again, the way mothers do. And then I sat in her guest room while they all left without me. I listened as the car engine started. I watched through the window as they drove off, and I stayed there, in silence. My hand still holding the small tin of cookies I made for my grandson. They were still warm, but the twist of it all, what made it even worse, was that I wasn't angry that I missed the play. I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I had become the kind of woman who waits to be invited into her own family's life. I was ashamed that I had believed I still mattered. But here's where it turned, because something happened after they left. I went to the bathroom and noticed something strange, a little framed sign hanging above the toilet. It said, "Boundaries are love." It hit me like a slap. That word, boundaries, the one people now use to push you away with a smile. That's what I had become, a boundary, an energy that needed to be managed. She wasn't protecting me. She was protecting herself from the guilt of looking me in the eye and admitting that she no longer had room for me in her story. So I walked into the living room and looked around. Her home was beautiful. Everything in its place, minimalist, calm, sterile. And then I saw something on the shelf, a family photo. Her husband, her kids, and me. Only, I was cropped out, halfway. It was an old photo, but the frame cut me off at the shoulder. I was just a ghost arm resting on her child's back. That was it. That was the moment. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I simply picked up my bag, left the cookies on the counter, and walked out. Quietly, gracefully, like I had learned to do all my life, and this time I didn't ask if it was okay. Some goodbyes aren't loud. They don't come with suitcases, or screaming matches, or slammed doors. Sometimes the deepest goodbyes are silent. Sometimes they happen long before you even leave. When I walked out of her house that evening, no one noticed. No one called after me. There were no footsteps. Behind mine, no "wait, Mom," echoing in the air. The cookies sat untouched on the counter and the lights stayed on. And that, I think, was the moment I realized I had already left long ago. That night was just the final act. I took the bus home. I remember the hum of it, the way it vibrated through the seat into my spine. I stared out of the window the whole time, watching the city blur into itself. And I thought, this is what it feels like to disappear and still be breathing. The house was cold when I got back. Quiet. My things were exactly where I had left them. My world hadn't changed, only my place in hers. That week I didn't call. I didn't text. And surprisingly, neither did she. No. Did you get home safe? Not even a photo from the school play. The silence between us became a living thing. It breathed. It fed on the pieces of me that still wanted to believe we could fix this. I moved slower after that. Not from age, but from grief. Grief is heavy in the legs. It steals your pace and puts a weight on every step. But with every quiet morning, every untouched chair across the table, something else began to settle too. Clarity. One afternoon, I opened the hallway closet to take out an old photo album. Not to reminisce, not at first, but to remind myself that once I had been more than this ache. That I had laughed without worry, danced in kitchens, raised children with nothing but my hands and stubborn love. Flipping through those pages, I saw my daughter as a baby again. I saw her first steps, her awkward teenage years, her graduation, and beside her in every single photo was me. My hands fixing her dress, my arms clapping in the crowd, my eyes proud, even when my body was tired. I had been everywhere in her life, present, even when invisible. And now I was neither. So I made a decision. A quiet one. No announcement. No confrontation. Just a promise to myself. I would no longer show up where I was merely being endured. Love doesn't beg. Love doesn't shrink itself to fit inside someone else's guilt. That Sunday, I packed a small suitcase. Not to leave, forever, but just to go away for a while. I didn't tell her. I booked a cottage 2 towns over, a small place with creaky floors and the smell of damp wood. The kind of place you go to remember who you were before the world asked you to be smaller. The days passed slowly there. I watched birds. I read old books. I walked barefoot in grass. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. It was peaceful. And then, on the 4th morning, My phone buzzed. It was a message from her. Just one line. "Mom, where are you?" That was it. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I miss you," just a simple demand for my location. And for a moment I felt that old pull, the need to rush back to soothe her discomfort. But I didn't reply. Hours later, another message came. "Are you angry with me?" Still, I didn't answer. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. For the first time, I wasn't responding to her mood. I wasn't adjusting myself to fit her emotional bandwidth. I was simply still, present in my own life, listening to my own silence. That evening, the phone rang. I let it ring. And when the voicemail came through, I didn't listen to it right away. I sat there, holding the phone, thinking of all the times I had dropped everything to be available to her, and how many times she had left me waiting without a second thought. Eventually, I pressed play. Her voice cracked. "Mom, I don't know what's going on. I know I've hurt you, and I'm scared. Please, just let me know you're okay." And right there, in that moment, I felt something shift. Not in her, but in me. Because for once she was scared of losing me, not the other way around. And it struck me, deeply and painfully, we teach people how to treat us. For years, I had shown her that my presence was unconditional, that I would always show up, always forgive, always wait in the hallway like a ghost with cookies in her hands. But now, she had to wonder. I didn't call her back. Not yet. I needed her to sit in that silence, just as I had. Because sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is leave, quietly, dignified, without slamming the door, and let them realize on their own what they took for granted. I didn't leave her money, or jewelry, or the silver cutlery she always eyed when guests came over. No, I left her something far more valuable and far more terrifying. A mirror. Not the kind that hangs on a wall. This one couldn't be touched. Couldn't be moved. It followed her silently, reflected back everything she had tried so hard not to see. That mirror was my absence. You see, when someone labels you a burden, they expect you to crumble, to shrink, to go quietly, apologetically, to retreat into the shadows with bowed shoulders and a soft, embarrassed smile. They never expect you to leave with your head held high. She never imagined I would actually walk away. Because I wasn't just her mother. I had become her safety net, her babysitter, her unpaid therapist, her invisible cheerleader, her emotional punching bag on bad days. She had grown used to my loyalty, but she had never once respected the weight of it. So when I left, I didn't say goodbye with a dramatic note or a speech. I didn't demand apologies or closure. I just removed myself. And that silence became unbearable. Not for me, for her. It started small. Missed appointments she used to rely on me for. Forgotten dates I used to remember. A sick day with no one to drop off soup. Then came the birthdays of her children, my grandchildren, where she realized there would be no handmade cake, no decorations painstakingly crafted at midnight, no tired but glowing grandmother singing off-key. Her world didn't fall apart. It simply lost its softness. The corners became sharper, the days colder. The echo of her own voice became louder in that once full house. She called once after that first month, left a message. Her tone had changed. There was no anger, no accusations, just confusion, and something softer I hadn't heard in years. She said, "I didn't think you'd really go." That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because behind it I heard the real confession. I didn't think you had enough self-worth to leave me. That's what she feared the most, not my presence, but the consequence of my absence. Not because she missed me, but because without me, there was no one left to absorb her reflection. She had to face herself. Fully. And that terrified her. She had always avoided mirrors, metaphorically speaking. Whenever she lashed out, she framed it as stress. When she dismissed my thoughts, she called it efficiency. When she interrupted, Me during dinner, it was practicality. Every harsh edge was justified, softened, repackaged. But now the excuses rang in an empty room, and that room echoed differently when love wasn't present to muffle the sound. Weeks passed. I heard from a mutual friend that she'd started seeing a therapist. That surprised me, not because I didn't think she needed one, but because she finally admitted it. One day a letter arrived. Not a text, not an email. A letter, handwritten. Her handwriting had changed. It was shakier than I remembered. She wrote, "I've realized I never saw you. Not really. I saw your service, your usefulness, but not you. And I'm sorry." And then she wrote something that broke me. "I'm scared I've become the very mother I once judged you for surviving." That sentence gutted me. Because she knew. She finally saw the cycle, the inheritance of pain, passed down from woman to woman, like a family heirloom no one wanted, but kept anyway. I sat with that letter for hours, read it again and again. I wept. Not for myself, but for the girl she used to be. The one who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares and ask, "Will you always be here?" Back then, I always said yes. I thought love meant permanence, that being there was the only proof I mattered. But now I understood something deeper. Sometimes love is leaving. Sometimes love is the mirror, the one that shows them what they've become, not to punish them, but to free them from it. She came to visit a few weeks later. She didn't ring the bell at first, just stood outside my window. I watched her from the couch, unsure whether to get up. My body wanted to open the door. My heart needed to know she would knock first, and she did. 3 soft knocks. She stood there holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Her face wasn't made up. Her voice cracked when she said, "Hi, Mom." I opened the door, slowly, but I didn't hug her right away. I just looked at her, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She let me see her, fully. The shame, the regret, the unspoken desperation in her eyes that begged, "Please still believe I can be better than I was," and I did. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. I deserved to witness her reckoning. I deserved to be more than forgotten service, and she deserved the chance to grow into something honest. So I stepped aside, let her in, but this time, I didn't make tea. I waited for her to ask me what I needed, and for the first time in my life she did. Time, I've learned, is not just a healer, it's also a revealer. It doesn't just stitch wounds closed, it shows you how deep they really were. In the silence that followed my leaving, I was forced to sit with truths I had avoided for decades. Not about my daughter, but about myself. When you give your life to someone, whether it's a child, a spouse, a parent, you start to disappear in small ways. At first it feels noble, loving, purposeful. But over the years I began trading away pieces of myself so gradually, I didn't notice I was vanishing. One late night call at a time, one swallowed opinion, one meal skipped because someone else was hungrier. I thought motherhood meant sacrifice. And it does, at first. But there's a line no one tells you about. The line where sacrifice becomes self-erasure. And I crossed it without knowing. Not just for my daughter, for everyone. But it was her words, "You're a burden," that finally broke the spell. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because deep down some part of me had started to believe them. That I had overstayed my welcome in the world. That needing care or space or dignity in old age was shameful. That love had an expiration date once you became inconvenient. I used to think emotional neglect was only loud, yelling, slamming doors, walking out. But it's often quieter. It's the silence when you enter a room and no one looks up. It's your name being forgotten in conversations about plans. It's birthdays remembered with store-bought guilt instead of affection. It's the casual way someone makes you feel replaceable. I didn't want to live out the rest of my life invisible, but I didn't want to live it bitter either. So I began the hardest journey of all, reclaiming the parts of me I had buried to make space for everyone else. I started painting again. I had forgotten how colors moved me, How I used to lose hours in shades of blue like it was a language only I understood. I began walking in the early mornings, before the world was awake enough to remind me of my age. I listened to music without worrying about the volume. I laughed louder than I was supposed to. I remembered the taste of solitude without sadness. And that's when something strange happened. I began to feel grateful, not for the pain, not for the disrespect, but for the rupture, for the confrontation I had feared all my life finally happening, because it set me free. And then, she came back. Not with roses or apologies rehearsed in a mirror. She came back differently, changed. Smaller somehow, not in stature but in certainty. That sharp edge in her voice had softened, the armor had cracked. The same daughter who once called me a burden now sat across from me with shaking hands, asking me how I had survived all those years, being needed but never really seen. She told me she'd had a dream. In it, she was my age, standing in a hallway of a silent house calling out, but no one answered. Her children had grown. Her friends were distant, and there was no one there to hold her grief. She said, "I woke up crying, Mom, because for the first time I felt what it was like. To be alone the way I left you alone, that was the moment I knew something had shifted. Not just in her, but between us, and yet, even as she reached for me with words I had waited years to hear, I didn't rush to comfort her. Not out of anger, but because I needed her to sit in that space for a moment longer, to really feel it, to understand that love cannot be something we return to only when it's easy. That forgiveness doesn't erase history, but it does begin the rewriting." She stayed with me that weekend, not to be cared for, but to care. She cleaned the kitchen without being asked, sat beside me during my evening tea. She listened, not to reply, but to understand. On the last night, she stood in the doorway of my room, just like she did when she was a child after a nightmare. She said, "I don't want to become someone who only sees value in people when they're useful." And I replied, "Then don't. But it'll take work, every day." She nodded. I could see the tears building, but she held them back. As she turned to leave the room, she paused and said, "I'm still afraid, of becoming cold, like I was." And I said gently, "Then stay warm, even if the world isn't." And for the first time in a long time, I believed both of us would be okay, because what I had given her wasn't revenge, it wasn't guilt, it was a reflection, and the choice to become something different. And maybe that's the most painful kind of love, the one that walks away, just long enough for someone to walk back with their eyes finally open.